The most senior commander of the US military in the Pacific just told the US Congress, under oath, that his command is running a live Bitcoin node. Now, this isn't just an idea on paper or a presentation by a company, it's an active part of the command responsible for American military power across more than half of the world. Right where the US is in a major competition with China. Admiral Paparo confirmed this in front of the Senate Armed Services Committee in April. The main idea behind this comes from a Space Force major whose book argues that Bitcoin's proof of work is a serious strategic tool like a modern form of military deterrence. That same major was then hired as a special assistant to Admiral Paparo himself. So in the next 10 minutes, I'll explain exactly what was confirmed, why the smartest parts of the US national security world are viewing Bitcoin's setup as defense infrastructure, and what this means for the long-term future of Bitcoin itself. I'm DC, and you're watching The Coin Bureau. So let's start with what was said in the hearing, because the mainstream news barely covered it. In April 2026, Admiral Paparo was speaking to the Senate Armed Services Committee. He officially confirmed that the US Indo-Pacific Command, Indo-PACOM, is operating a Bitcoin node. He called the Bitcoin system a valuable computer science tool and described it as peer-to-peer zero-trust transfer of value, a way to move information or value directly between parties without a central authority, and directly relevant to how the military protects its critical networks. Paparo framed it in terms of power projection, which is military language deliberately chosen. And the key point, he clearly stated that the command is not mining Bitcoin. So this isn't about investing money or trying to make a profit, it's purely about cybersecurity and defending networks. And this has now been formally recognized at the highest level in the Pacific, of course, with some of the operational details guarded behind closed doors. You see, this wasn't a leak. This is a 4-star combatant commander speaking under oath to the US Senate. And to understand why this is such a big deal, you need to know what Indo-PACOM is. It's the largest US military command by area, covering about 52% of the Earth's surface, from the US West Coast to the western border of India. So it's absolutely massive. About 380,000 service members work under its command across places like Hawaii, Japan, South Korea, and Guam. Its main job is to stop and, if needed, defeat Chinese military action over Taiwan, the South China Sea, and the entire region. Defense experts widely consider it to be the single most important command for the US military in the next decade. So when Indo-PACOM adopts a new tool, it's a big deal. Simply because the tool is directly useful in the most critical military area in the world against the most powerful rival the United States has faced in a long time. And this brings us directly to the person whose ideas are now being used by the command. His name is Major Jason Lowery, an active duty Space Force officer and engineer who was a fellow at MIT. In early 2023, he submitted his main paper to MIT and the Department of Defense. It was published as an initially free ebook called Softwar, and its main idea is pretty extreme. Historically, countries have shown power through physical force, armies, navies, weapons, and the threat of causing real-world damage. Lowery argues that in the digital age, there's an equivalent, using physical energy through computation to secure digital networks from enemies. He calls this electro-cyber security. Lowery claims that Bitcoin's proof-of-work system is the most proven example of this idea because its security is connected to the real world through a measurable energy cost, not just to code. Throughout Softwar, Bitcoin is often compared to gunpowder simply because gunpowder was invented for chemistry experiments but ended up completely changing global power. His claim is that proof-of-work is just as important today, and any country that ignores it is giving up a key way to project power. When Softwar first came out, the reactions were pretty mixed. Many Bitcoin maxis didn't like the idea of Bitcoin being tied to the military and war in general, while others found it fascinating. But shortly after the release, Lowery was reportedly ordered to stop selling the book entirely and discussing the topic publicly. And then he seemingly vanished. 2 years later, Lowery finally reappeared and announced that he had been appointed as a special assistant to the commander of US Indo-Pacific Command, reporting directly to Admiral Paparo on major strategic issues. So the person who came up with the idea of proof of work as a deterrent is now advising the 4-star commander running US strategy against Beijing. That's one of the fastest times for a fringe idea to become part of the establishment in recent history. Okay, now let's clarify the technical part, as most news gets this entirely wrong. Paparo was clear, Indo-Pacom is not mining Bitcoin, it's running a node. So what does a node actually do? Why is this of any value to the military? A full Bitcoin node downloads and checks the entire history of the blockchain, every transaction since it started in 2009. This allows the military to study how the network behaves under real attacks. They can watch in real time how a decentralized system handles attempts to split it, shut it down, or disrupt it facing actual global threats. It gives them direct, unfiltered insight into the cybersecurity strengths of the most attacked decentralized system in history. And of course, there is the operational fact that interests a Pacific military command. Bitcoin has been running almost constantly since January 2009. Since 2013, it has essentially had 100% uptime, a level of reliability that is better than every major tech company. It's better than AWS, better than traditional cloud services, and better than almost any centralized system the Department of Defense has ever looked at. Indo-Pacom's biggest challenge in a Pacific conflict would be keeping communications and command and control systems working against an enemy that has invested heavily in electronic warfare, anti-satellite weapons, and cyber attacks designed specifically to take down traditional military networks. The Bitcoin system has never been taken down. The lessons from how it stays online through attacks by powerful nations, major network shifts, and constant pressure are directly useful for building military command systems that can survive in a hostile environment. And this is where China makes the story even bigger. In September 2021, the People's Bank of China, along with 9 other government departments, banned all forms of cryptocurrency activity and forced the shutdown of most Bitcoin mining inside the country. At that time, China controlled somewhere between 65 and 75% of the global hash rate, the computing power securing the Bitcoin network. The network's difficulty adjusted downward by 28% the next month. The computing power simply moved to the United States, Canada, and Kazakhstan. And while all of this happened, the blocks kept being created. The network never went offline for a single hour. That single event was the most extreme real-world test of decentralization ever conducted, and the network handled it perfectly. Today, the United States leads the global hash rate at about 37.4%. Beijing, on the other hand, went in the opposite direction entirely. It created the digital yuan, a centralized, programmable, and completely monitored digital currency controlled entirely by the People's Bank of China. By late 2025, the ECNY had recorded billions of transactions and trillions of yuan in total value. In the first quarter of this year, a cross-border platform connecting the central banks of China, Hong Kong, Thailand, the UAE, and Saudi Arabia handled over $55 billion in transactions, with about 95% of that settled in digital yuan. Iran is reportedly using this system to pay for oil and to collect tolls in the Strait of Hormuz, completely avoiding the dollar-based financial system. So we have 2 world powers with 2 completely different digital strategies. On one hand, we have China building a centralized, state-monitored payment system designed to give Beijing total visibility and create a parallel international financial system that the US-controlled SWIFT system cannot touch. And on the other hand, we have the United States running a Bitcoin node at its Pacific Military Command, holding a massive strategic reserve of Bitcoin under an executive order, and watching Congress discuss bills that clearly label domestic hash rate as a national security asset. So Bitcoin is no longer just a financial asset in this context, it is a contested geopolitical infrastructure. Which brings us to what this actually changes and why it might have been entirely ignored by the press. Almost every discussion about major institutions adopting Bitcoin over the last 4 years has been about financial approval. Things like spot ETFs, major corporate investments, and wealth managers slowly allocating client money. Now, of course, that's one type of adoption, it's real, but It's sensitive to price, sensitive to market cycles, and can be easily reversed. A severe market crash can change institutional rules, reverse investment flows, and force companies to sell their Bitcoin. What the Indo-Pacific node represents is a completely different kind of adoption. The US military isn't buying Bitcoin, it's studying the system and treating the underlying technology as strategically useful for the defense of the country in the world's most critical region. This is a much more permanent form of approval than any financial product because governments don't get rid of strategic infrastructure when prices fall. They integrate it deeper into military rules, into purchasing, into training, and into the design of how command and control systems will be built for all future conflicts. To put it simply, financial adoption can disappear or flatten out within a cycle, while strategic infrastructure adoption tends to grow and strengthen over decades. So here's the key takeaway. The US military running a Bitcoin node is not a joke or a marketing stunt. It is one of the highest credibility confirmations of Bitcoin's fundamental architecture that has ever happened. Delivered under oath by a 4-star commander of the most strategically important command in American military, and shaped by an officer whose entire idea sees proof of work as a form of national power. So the story isn't that the Pentagon is buying coins, the story is that the most sophisticated parts of the US national security establishment have decided the technology beneath this network is worth studying as defense infrastructure in the most important military region against the most important adversary. For everyone holding Bitcoin, the takeaway is fundamental. Every prior wave of institutional engagement with Bitcoin has been framed in financial terms as an investment, a hedge against inflation, or a future reserve for your family and kids. This is the first major piece of evidence that the adoption curve is moving into a different area, one connected to national security strategy rather than portfolio construction. Whether that makes the price go up in the next cycle is a separate question. But what it tells you about the long-term legitimacy of the network is the question worth taking seriously, because validations of this kind do not disappear in a bear market. They build up conversation by conversation, hearing by hearing, appointment by appointment, until one day the asset you were watching is a fundamental part of the state's strategic architecture. The information that actually moves markets almost never shows up on a chart. If it does, it's usually too late. And that's exactly why we built the Coin Bureau Telegram channel. It's entirely free and you'll get this kind of intel pinged straight to your phone the moment it breaks. The link is in the description below, or you can scan the QR code currently displayed on your screen. It's genuinely worth it. That being said, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again very soon. This is DC signing off.